Morning, everyone. Any sore heads after yesterday? Everyone's okay. Cool. I've got a sore head. Alexander, thank you for joining us, and welcome to Dublin. So we've got a great talk lined up for you today. Alex is the CEO of WeTransfer. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the company in case anyone's unfamiliar?
Yeah, first of all, great to be here. Great to meet you as well, and hi, everyone. I'm glad to hear that there are smiles after yesterday. Party, hopefully. So WeTransfer is a company that's been around for 14 years. We've been around the block. It's one of those amazing gems hidden in Europe. We are known predominantly for our core product, which perhaps some of you have used, called WeTransfer, that uses to move digital content from A to B. But as a company, we do a lot more. We serve the creative community, as we call it, and we build tools and provide platforms for folks to leverage their talents and hopefully make a living. And we have been embedded in the creative community for a very long time. And we've built a brand that folks trust, and we use that brand to go and try to solve as many problems as they have as we can. And the company is a bit different than your typical company that you might have seen before. Early in our journey, we decided to take a different approach to growth. We focused on profitability. We focused on long-term thinking. We focused on really focusing on understanding our user base, understanding what problems they have. And that has helped us drive a sustainable business model that has seen a decade of profitability and growth. And we've been on that journey for quite a while, and we're very excited of where we're going in terms of strategy.
Well, Alex is in a great place to talk about the cultural change in tech over the last 20 or so years. What do you think are the key factors or events that have prompted the transition from move fast and break things to the mindset of mending and nurturing?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So we all kind of knew that growth for the sake of growth, or growth at all cost, was never going to be sustainable. And it had its moment. It's actually served us well early on, as it allowed to the spur of a whole new generation of entrepreneurs who saw the opportunity of using tech to really go and disrupt and improve certain industries or solve certain problems. And I can attest to that. I was in the middle of it, and there was a lot of energy, a lot of passion to use technology to change the world. And it worked for a while, but at that time, technology was on the fringes. We were using the technology to solve certain amount of problems, but it was on the periphery of how we live and work. And today, if you look where we are today, technology is how we live and how we work and how we interact. It's so intertwined in what we do that the need to start being responsible about that technology arose over the last several years. And of course, the world changed to a certain extent in the last 5 years. And we saw a lot of also examples of companies that took the first mantra of moving fast and breaking things, betray to a certain extent the trust of their users. There were some high-profile cases where people can point to. And I think we all realized that it's time for us to be also responsible. And now this is front and center as an alternative model of growth and profitability and building a business. And I think that's incredibly important to talk about why this, in certain cases nowadays, is better, and why do we need to keep focusing on that responsible angle as we build technology that intertwines in our life.
Yeah. And how does the culture of mending and nurturing benefit both technology companies and the users or the customers?
So from the perspective of the user, as I said, we use now technology to do everything almost on a daily basis. So it's really important as you start to build your business on a particular technology stack, or you try to, as a user, or if you try to use technology to develop your talents or to be more effective at work, what you need to have confidence and trust is that that technology is not going to be pulled underneath your feet down the line, and you can rely on that technology being what it is. For you to do the job you need to do. And what we've seen in the past is that if you build a company or a business model that is not sustainable, at some point you have to betray that trust. You have to change the pricing model. You have to change how you charge. You have to do all these difficult decisions which basically really pull people's lives in a bit of a turmoil. And I think it's really important for users to know that the company that they rely on has a business model that is sustainable, that is predictable to a certain extent. I'm not talking about innovation, that will always be there. But it's predictable, so you can rely on it and you can build your business. And from a company perspective, it allows us to be that force for good, if you will, that has a long-term thinking, that you can leverage that trust and leverage that position that you have with your user base so you can continue to build upon all new business, continue to launch new products in the same way. So it benefits us because it brings this level of trust in between companies and users.
Yeah, so, I mean, so you feel like, for a user's point of view, if they feel that the technology they're using is from a company that, you know, nurtures their employees, that sort of treats them well, you feel like they will benefit from that, and they will feel more trusting towards that technology than, say, a company that is, you know, moving fast and breaking things, you know, possibly making mistakes, possibly working with employees who are dissatisfied or burnt out. You feel that makes a tangible difference to the user?
Yeah, I think certainly to a certain extent that's true across the board. It happens from both sides, from how the company treats its employees and how the company builds a business model that's sustainable when it comes to growth. So yeah, if I'm a user that I rely on a certain, let's say, application to make a living, I want to know this company is not going to blow up. I want to know that this company is going to be there. It's not going to suddenly increase the pricing or take a bigger cut of my living, because then my whole life goes to quite of a different trajectory than I expected. And I think the way that the company treats its employees, the way the company builds the culture, and the way the company builds the business model, it's a really good indicators to know, to a certain extent, nobody can be certain, but you can know whether this is going to be something that you have to deal with as a user down the line. And secondary, we all know to a certain extent that there are business models where we are the product as users. And I think it's important to know that, and it's important to understand what that means, because we lived in a world of many, many years of, call it free money, where almost everything we did was subsidized. And now suddenly we have to wake up to a moment where we start to pay more and more and more at the same time. And that, of course, puts us as users in a very difficult position. And as a company, you want employees who are bought into your mission. You want employees who care about the problems they solve, but also care how they solve them. Because they also want to feel that there is a meaning to what they do. And I think that's another angle that helps to kind of predict the stability that perhaps a company has.
I mean, we were talking earlier, and it's a very nuanced, you know, position where a company's got a culture of move fast and break things. Now it's turning more to mending and nurturing. You know, the sort of pioneer of that mantra was Mark Zuckerberg, and he's done okay. You know, Facebook or Meta, you know, it's a huge company. So that has served them well for a number of years, and using that model, and using that culture. And now, you know, it's slowly shifting to mending and nurturing. But people like Musk at Twitter are sort of pushing back against that and wants to move fast and break things again. You know, is there a right or wrong?
I would say there's different. I don't want to go and say what's right, what's wrong. I think you have to find out what model predicts to a certain extent success. We've had a lot of examples, to your point, whether that's Meta or some other company that's utilized this philosophy and has become very successful. But I would venture to say that there's a lot who've done that and have not been successful. And for me, it's not a competition which one is, oh, this is the right one or this is the wrong one. For me, it's about, can we prove consistently that the culture of mending and nurturing, it's actually going to be as successful in the long term, if not even more, than some of these outrageous bets we've made to move fast and break things. And I venture to say that at an aggregate, I believe that more companies will be successful with mending and nurturing than they will be with moving fast and breaking things. But we're here to prove it, and time will tell.
Now, you're here for your insights as a successful CEO, so I'm sure the audience would love to know, what are some practical examples or case studies that you've come across in your career that illustrate the positive outcomes of a mending and nurturing culture within a company?
Yeah, I mean, again, I look at it through lenses. One lens is around employee and culture, and the other lens is around product. And I mean, I don't know if any CEO will come up and say that their culture is not great. So I would surprise you by saying our culture is great. But I think it's about the sustainability of that culture and how much people identify with what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, and whether they feel that passion to go and solve these problems for the users. But in terms of practical example, WeTransfer has several in our history. Early on, as I said, we tried to do things quite a bit different, which were a little bit more contrarian. At the time, we were called as, not silly, but perhaps silly for not taking the route that everybody knew it's going to be successful. Early on in our journey, we decided to have a freemium business model. And that meant that we wanted to monetize our free tier with advertising. And in the time we did it, advertising was just banners, 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 the Google way. And we said, no, we're going to do it different. And it meant that it will be much more difficult for us to sell. It meant it will take a long more time for us to make money of it. But we wanted to embed our ads in our user experience. So today's WeTransfer ads are part of the user experience. It is the first company I've ever come across where users will write to us and ask us to see another ad because we present this amazing canvas that is quite interactive for brands. But it meant that it took a long time for us to go and make sure that this is something that brands understand, that we can go and sell, we can build the ads ourselves. So taking this long road meant it was more difficult, but now we find ourselves in a way quite differentiated and quite successful compared to some competitors because people trust these ads and people see the engagement we get on these ads. And of course, I also was at Join, which was a video streaming service in Germany, where we decided early on to be a bit more contrarian and say, it's good to have global content that everybody wants to watch, but how about the local content? For country X, a lot of people identify with that content. We took the wrong road of making sure we bring employees who are passionate about that local content and go and build that. And it's just yet another example of taking the wrong route that at time was called unsustainable and silly because we're not making as much money as we could. And yet now that turned out to be quite the opportunity for the businesses. So I think sometimes it's about that long-term thinking that people have to bring to the table and go a little bit more contrarian perhaps to what's easy in order for you to capitalize later on.
Yeah. So, there are some positives. What are the challenges or obstacles do you think tech companies face when they're trying to transition from one culture to another, whatever that culture may be? We're talking about a move fast, break things to a mending and nurturing, but what are the obstacles that any company or any tech company will face when trying to significantly transition from one culture to another?
Well, that's a billion-dollar question of how to transition one culture to another. Nobody really probably has a playbook that goes step by step. But what I would say is that, extremes are bad. I'll go out and say that. I think if you're all the way on the move, quick break things, we know what the dangers are there. We've seen them. But there's also a danger if you go on the other side where it's only about minding and nurturing because you do have to have ambition. You do have to have long-term goals. You do have to have impatience to go and solve the problem for the user base that you serve. And sometimes that gets lost. Sometimes that gets lost when you focus too much of, hey, we need to focus about ourselves, we need to focus about doing things right, and we want to be patient and long-term. So you have to find that balance. And I think in these transitions of cultures, the difficulty is that it's rarely the balance that people seek. It's mostly, oh, this didn't work, let's go this way. And this black and white usually causes a lot of confusion, a lot of turmoil. So it has to be a transition towards the middle, that I say. And I know that's a bit vague, but there are so many moving elements of a culture that you have to consider before you move it to a different stage.
And what would you consider key principles of a company that wants to foster this environment of mending and nurturing?
Long-term thinking. Being very deliberate of not chasing the latest and greatest fad, if you will. A very clear mission and vision. Basically, what I mean is going back to the basics. Figuring out who your users are, figuring out what the problems are, be relentless in solving them, but also realizing that you have a responsibility to solve them in a certain way that it's sustainable. And I think if you keep those principles intact and really live by them and take the long-term view, it's easy to adapt if you need to. It's easy to pivot if it's need to, but you always have an anchor for you and your employee and your culture that they can lean back on in order to deliver what their users expect.
We've got some questions from the audience here. I mean, this is not necessarily about a business culture, but do you see a change in user or consumer behavior and a change in demands in recent years?
Yes, certainly. I think users have realized the perils of trusting companies too much. We've hit a huge backlash when it comes to data, when it comes to trust, when it comes to brands. I think the notion of a brand nowadays is a lot more important than perhaps it was 10 years ago. And I think consumers are now much more deliberate with their choices of where to spend their hard-earned income. And I think as a company, you have to realize you're in a constant competition with yourself to do better, but also with a lot of other companies that have decided to take a similar path. So things have changed. Of course, you still have people who use companies and products that they're not happy with because they have to. But I think given the choice, now people are much more willing to change, much more willing to adapt their spending habits in order to support companies that do the right thing.
And with a lot of big tech companies now sort of shifting to the cloud and startups offering faster, easier file transfers, does WeTransfer have to pivot now in any way?
No, we don't. That's the good news. Our product has always been viral in nature, and what we've seen, even in the era of a lot of competitors and a lot of different alternatives, that we continue to grow quite sustainably and continue to be profitable for the simple reason that we've built this trust with our user base for over 14 years. We have not gone against our principles, and people know that. And that trust now translates into a massive amount of users that come to the platform every day. We have more than 80 million monthly active users that come from 190 countries. We continue to see incredibly strong engagement. And in this new world of content explosion, which we thought it was the last 10 years, but I think now with AI we'll see a massive content explosion going forward. I think we continue to be that preferred player for creative folks who want to engage their audiences directly, who want to have a direct relationship, and they know we are not a platform that will stand in between them and their audiences. And we continue to solve core problems for them in a way that it's frictionless. And as long as we keep true to our core, I am very bullish on the company.
That's great. And going back to the sort of topic of the panel, how does WeTransfer apply the mending and nurturing mantra into your own business model?
Yeah, for us, it's in many ways, I feel very lucky because I came to a company that already embedded all of that into the core of how we do business. And that goes on almost every front you can imagine. So for example, we are a tech company, we do use cloud. But for example, we started doing ESG when we started doing the company. So for example, we have been on a mission with AWS for a very long time now to continue to decrease our carbon footprint. Not because it's modern or it's popular, but that's how we do it. Everything we launch on our platform side aims at decreasing the carbon footprint as well as delivering business outcomes. And in terms of culture, we always wanted to support and nurture our audience. So we started very early on, giving free inventory to emerging artists, partnering with responsible brands. We have a foundation that we deliver 1% of our top line to in order to support artists. So all these things didn't start 2-3 years ago. They started 10 years ago. And back then we were the contrarian in the room. And I'm very happy to see that now we are leading the way in a wave that focuses on doing that consistently.
Right, guys, I think we'll leave it there. Alexander, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Massimo.